All right, so the first thing we're going to do is look for parentheses. We actually have two sets of parentheses, so we're going to start with this one. All right, what is -1 minus 1? -2. So we have 3. I'm going to show all the steps. And this is what you're going to need to do when you take your skills check. So if you only give me an answer, you do not get points. I need to see how you got your answer. So now we still have parentheses, so we're still going to work inside of our parentheses. And inside of my parentheses, I have two operations. I have addition and division. So which one comes first, adding or dividing? Dividing. It's like if you're washing your hair, you don't put in conditioner and then wash it. Everything has an order. The next step in this order is division. So we're going to divide. So that gives me 3, and then it would be 2 plus, and we're going to divide these together. So what do you get when you divide 6 divided by -2? -3, good. And now we're going to do what's inside of my parentheses because we're still working in our parentheses. So my next operation would be to add 2 plus -3, which is -1, and your final answer is -3. So I would have to see all of this on Friday for you to get full credit. Any questions? All right, let's look at number 6. So again, we have two sets of parentheses. So we're going to start off by working this first parentheses right here. The only thing to do in this parentheses is subtract. There's only one operation. And 2 minus 5 is -3. So now inside of my parentheses, I have two operations. I have subtraction and I also have multiplication. Which comes first? Multiplication. So this is my next step. I'm going to multiply these two numbers that I have highlighted in green. So the next step would be to multiply. So then that gives me -3. And then that would be a 24. So now we're going to work inside of our parentheses and subtract. 24 minus 6. So 24 minus 6 is 18. And then my last step, so this was my next step as I subtracted. My last step is to multiply, and I believe, I don't have my calculator, it's -54. But make sure that that's right. Is that right? -54? Okay, mental math. All right, that's it. That's order of operations. Any questions about how we work through that? All right, so now we're going to talk about fractions. So equivalent fractions. To get an equivalent fraction, you can multiply or divide numerator and denominator. Key word is multiply or divide by the same number. So as long as I am multiplying or dividing by the same number, it is equivalent. Okay, so I'm going to start with this 1/5. Somebody give me a number. Give me any number between 2 and 5. Andrew, give me a number. 4. I want you to multiply both of these by 4. So if I take 1/5 and I multiply by 4, top and bottom by 4, a fraction that would be equivalent to 1/5 would be 4/20. So 1/5 is the same as 4/20. Alondra, give me another number between 2 and 10, but not 4. 6. So I want you to multiply 1 over 5, top and bottom by 6. So if I take 1 over 5 and I multiply it by 6. So again, now I'm going to take that 1/5, multiply it by 6. Then that would be 6 over 30. All of these fractions are equivalent. And I just did 2. I just did 2. We could keep going. I could ask Jaden to give me another number. Then I could ask Alan to give me another number. I could ask Kira to give me, I could literally just keep multiplying by different numbers. But the key is that I want to make sure you have, emphasizing your notes at the top, is the key is it has to be the same number. So I can't multiply, so it has to be the same number, same number. I can't decide to multiply 1 by 3 and 5 by 10. That's not equivalent. Equivalent means I'm multiplying or dividing by the same number. So let's look at B. So now let's start off by dividing, because this one can be divided. What's a number that divides into 9 and 12? 3. So if you divide 9 and 12, so 9 over 12, I'm going to start by dividing it by 3. Then I would get 3 over 4. 3 over 4 is equivalent to 9 over 12. Cortez, give me a number. Any number.
8.
8. So now let's go to 9 over 12. Let's multiply it by 8 to come up with another equivalent. So again, when I'm coming up with my equivalent fractions, so when you're doing this in your homework and on your test, you really shouldn't have the same numbers. So 9 times 8 is 72. 12 times 8, I think it's 96, but make sure. Oh man, look at me knowing my multiplication facts. Sometimes, I don't know them, but we get too high, I don't know them, but all right, there we go. These are all equivalent fractions. They all mean the same thing. Okay, let's look at C. What's a number that can divide into, now I always start with division if you can. You can't always divide though. Like for A, we couldn't divide. But C, we can start off by dividing. What number divides into 14 and 21? 7. So 14 over 21. We're going to start by dividing them both by 7. And that, what does that give you? 2/3. Good. All right, give me a number. Any number. Jaden Lewis. Give me a number. Any number. 5. All right, so let's take that 14 over 21. And this time we're going to multiply it by 5. Again, as long as we're doing the same thing, it is equivalent. So let's go ahead and multiply them by 5. And see what you get. So I want to say 14 times 5 is 70. 21, I'm going to say that is, so 20 times 5 is 100. So 105, 21 times 5. All right, so 70 over 105. All right, any questions about how we're coming up with these equivalent fractions? All right, last one. Let's look at D. Can we divide D? 13 and 26. What can we divide them by? By 13. So let's start off by taking 13 over 26. We're going to start by dividing it by 13. And then why don't we multiply them by 2. Again, same operation produces equivalent fractions. It's just long as it's the same, it's equivalent. So that would be 26 over 52. All right, any questions about how we came up with these equivalent fractions? All right, so now let's talk about adding and subtracting fractions. So in order to add or subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So the number at the bottom has to be the same. So I gave you the first two, they already have a common denominator. When they have a common denominator, we don't change it. We keep that 5 a 5. And then I'm just adding the 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. So that would be your answer. Go ahead and try to do B by yourself. So we get 4 over 10, which can be reduced to 2/5. And we got that by coming up with an equivalent fraction. And the equivalent fraction we got was from dividing by 2. Yes, Drew? I do recommend, yes, you do have to reduce on the test. So our equivalent fraction, because we're reducing, my final answer would be 2/5. Okay, but sometimes you don't have a common denominator. So my common denominator that I'm going to use for this example would be 8. Okay? So if I'm using 8, 7 over 8 is going to stay. But what do I have to multiply by 4 to change that to an 8? Hi, how are you? Hey, how are you? All right, so 3 over 4, we're going to multiply top and bottom by 2. So when I do that, so what I'm doing is coming up with an equivalent fraction. So the equivalent fraction is going to be 6 over 8. So what is 7 over 8 minus 6 over 8? Keep the 8 and subtract 7 minus 6, you get 1. All right, I want to pass this out. This could be useful to some people. If it's not, that's okay. But when I taught this, whenever I teach this, I always like to pass out this chart. And I do recommend, let me go ahead and hole punch this, that you keep this in your binder as a reference throughout the school year. So you all can see, how am I coming up with this 8? So what I'm actually doing is looking in the 4 and the 8, and I'm trying to find a number that's in both columns. The smallest number in both columns. So that's how I came up with the 8, is when you're looking at this chart, when you look at 4 and 8, notice that 8 is the smallest number in both columns. All right, let's look at D. Oops. So if you're looking in your 3 and 9 column, in the 3 and 9 column, what's the smallest number in both the 3 and 9 column? So if you look at the 3s and you look at the 9s, what's the smallest number that appears in both columns? 9. So I'm going to keep this first one, 8/9. But for the second fraction, I have to multiply it by 3. To get an equivalent fraction, I have to multiply it by 3. Now we have a common denominator. My final answer is 11/9. So in order to add or subtract fractions, sometimes we have to multiply one fraction. Sometimes we don't have to multiply any of the fractions. When we look at the last two examples, we actually have to multiply them both. So go ahead and look in your 9s and 4s if you're not sure, and tell me the number that's in both of those columns. The smallest number in the 9 and 4 rows or columns. Thumbs up when you figured out what that number would be. It's the smallest number in both of those columns. And this time we're going to have to multiply both of them to get to it. So when you look at it, that number would be what? Does everyone see that 36 is in both of those columns? Does everyone see that? So 36 is going to be my denominator. So that means I have to multiply this first fraction by 4. So that gives me 16/36. And the second fraction, I have to multiply it by 9, which gives me 27/36. So we're going to leave the 36, and then in your calculator, go ahead and type in 16 minus 27. And you should get a negative this time. So 16 minus 27 would be -11, and that would be your final answer. All right, you only need a common denominator to add or subtract. So now let's do the last two operations. Now let's talk about multiplication. When you multiply, you just go straight across. So let's look at A. Go straight across. Take 1 times 3. So again, for multiplication, you do not need a common denominator. You just go straight across. So 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 4 is 8. And that is your answer. So you just go straight across. Let's write that. Straight across. For question B, what is the denominator to the 7? A 1. So can you write that as 7/1? Now go straight across. 7 times 2 is... And 1 times 5 is, that's your answer. For question C, whenever you multiply two negatives, it becomes positive. So I know that my answer will be positive. So I'm going to take 5 times 3, which is, and 9 times 5, which is 45. Now this one can be reduced. If you look at your chart, looking in the 5s, notice that 15 and 45, no, actually go to the 15s, I'm sorry. Go to the 15s. Do you notice that 15 and 45 is in both of those columns? So that means that we can divide by 15. And my final answer is actually 1/3. All right, question D. I have a positive multiplied by a negative, so my answer will be negative. So 5 times 9 is 45, yep. And 6 times 10 is 60. So again, look at your 15s. When you look in your 15s, you should see both of those numbers. So that means that we can divide both of them by 15. And that would be -3/4. All right, any questions about how to multiply fractions? Just a few more and then we are done, y'all. The last one, the last operation, we talked about adding and subtracting. We talked about multiplying. So let's end with division. For division, you're going to do a keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. So what that means is I'm going to keep the first fraction. Then I'm going to change it from division to multiplication. And then flip the second fraction. So this becomes keep the 1/2, change it to multiplication, flip it to 4/3. Now you're going to multiply straight across. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. And what does that reduce down to? What number? If you look in your 2's, 4 and 6 is in the 2, so you can divide both of these by 2. So your final answer would be 2/3. All right, go ahead. Now for question B, B is written like a fraction, but you can write that with division. So let's go ahead and write that as 6/7 divided by 3/14 because that's what you really have. When you have a fraction shows division. So now that I rewrote that as division, I'm going to do my keep, change, flip. Keep the first fraction, change, and flip. Go ahead and multiply straight across. Six times 14 is that 72? No, that's not right. 84. So 84 over 21. So your chart only goes up to 20. But both of these, if you were to type this in your calculator, 84 divided by 21, you get 4. So your final answer is 4. All right, try to do C by yourself. So we have 2/3 divided by 4. And feel free to write that as a fraction, 4/1. Then we're going to do our keep, change, flip. Keep, change, flip. Which gives us 2/12, which reduces to 1/6. Who had that for their final answer? Again, when you take your skills check Friday, you have to show your work. All right, in our last question, I have 7/1. So I'm going to write that as 7/1. Keep, change, flip. And that would be 35/2. All right, just a reminder, homework 1 is due tomorrow. So everyone should be taking out homework 1. Let's go ahead and finish that out. Use these last 14 minutes to work on that and get help on that, because I am collecting that at the beginning of class tomorrow.